Hello, audience. My name is Dalton Mortimer, and I am a authenticator. And welcome back to A Mystic Vlogs, a show where we take a relatively serious look at media with explicit fantastical or supernatural elements through a magical, mystical, mythological, folkloric, paranormal, or occultic lens. And this week's Legend of Tomorrow left me once again in the uncomfortable position of, number one, it being a fairly good episode, thus minimizing the comedic rages I can go into, and also not giving me very much mystical speaking to talk about. I mean, sure, I can go over the monster of the week and the various lore surrounding it, but that will take us up to about the 10-minute mark, and I usually want these to be between 15 minutes and 25 minutes. Usually it goes a little over than that, but, what can you do? Anyway, on with the show. Getting down to business, the A-plot of this episode involves Hank Haywood finding out that the legends, being a bunch of historical misfits and ne'er-do-wells, behave exactly like a series of misfits and ne'er-do-wells and don't particularly keep to a budget, therefore prompting him to moonlight on a mission with the legends and see if they're worth the costs that are relatively exorbitant that it takes to keep the upkeep going. And said plot involves the 1920s in Paris, a Minotaur taking up residence in the Parisian catacombs, and Mr. Ernest Hemingway. For those that don't know much about this point in history, yes, Hemingway and many other authors and artists bebopped around Paris quite often around this time period. And interestingly, so did Aleister Crowley, I believe, during this time period. He was in and out of Paris quite a lot during the 1920s. They don't bring him in. I just think it would have been interesting if they had, considering, magic season, and given that Constantine is very, very loosely based on Aleister Crowley to the admittance of Alan Moore. So I'm doing that thing where I write a show better than the show writers do. But still, would have been nice to see. Especially considering that Alistair wrote several hymns to Pan and was a proponent of Thelema, which essentially boiled down to magically sanctioned hedonism, and probably would have worshipped the Minotaur as a symbol of male vitality and all that jazz. But once again, I'm writing a show better than the show writers did, or at least including more magic than they intended to, so moving on. The sort of further details of the A-plot are essentially that the elder Haywood wishes that Nate would be more quote-unquote manly, and this is taken into overdrive by the fact that he meets his idol, Ernest Hemingway, which obviously they're going for the whole toxic masculinity thing, and insofar as they're doing that, I have to ask, why Hemingway? I don't mean why in universe did he pick Hemingway. Hemingway's awesome, but out of universe, if you're trying to make the toxic masculinity argument, you might want to pick someone who's, more like stereotypically masculine. Not trying to tell you how to do your jobs, considering the existence of toxic masculinity or not is really none of my business. I'm an anti-SJW after all. But writers aren't particularly known for being quote-unquote toxically masculine, is all I'm saying. Like, all things considered, I think actually in the, traditionalist definition of masculinity department, a history degree that Nate actually, went to college for might actually be more stereotypically masculine than a writer. Even a particularly masculine one like Hemingway or Orwell. Just saying, if you're going to go with the toxic masculinity thing, and you have at your disposal one of the original and relatively definitive progenitors of the idea of toxic masculinity, that being the guy that played Biff Tannen in the Back to the Future franchise, who we can all agree, even if, toxic masculinity is or is not a thing, is probably as close to toxic masculinity as it's possible to get in a fictional character. So, you really kind of screwed the pooch on your own toxic masculinity messaging there, Cho, is all I'm saying. And if I, an anti-SJW critic who's more concerned with, mystical accuracy and whatnot, can write a toxic masculinity theme better than you, you might be doing your job wrong, is all I'm saying. Unless, of course, what you're going for is toxic masculinity is present in people who aren't even stereotypically masculine and are present even in cases where masculinity is tempered, as we see with both Hank preferring Hemingway as an archetype of masculinity and also the Minotaur later on being soothed a la music soothed the savage beast with a lullaby. So if that's where you're going, I guess you could go that way, but SJWs prefer when you hit them vicariously over the head with themes, so I'm not sure many of them want to see this way depicted, so really you're pleasing nobody here. So, yeah, you might have screwed your pooch regardless of how anything goes here. Too bad, so sad, but moving on. Really just did this to pad up the, runtime. Meanwhile, B-plot essentially revolves around every zoo slash prison slash any given creature being held by a government story ever, which is to say, you need to treat these creatures more like humans. We can't afford to treat them more like humans because if we treated them more like humans, we would fail to effectively imprison them. Well, you can still be human to things without releasing them into the wild, and so on and so on. And also, Ray and Nora's romance, because of course. And oh, by the way, it's also Director Sharp's birthday, so yay, reasons. Yay. There isn't much to say here other than there's a moment where Nora gets over emotional and as a result her magic spasms because, she's naturally gifted with magic. Therefore, any, large surplus of emotion are going to make her life energies surge and thereby make her magic surge, and that's all well and good. Although there was a cringy moment where it was said that these creatures had DNA, to which I was both confused and having to call bullshit, because these are spiritual creatures primarily, thereby, made of life energy. They're energy beings, therefore they only manifest physically insofar as they need to manifest physically. So how in the sweet galloping giddy fucks of anything do they have DNA to be locked onto with, scanners and shit? Given that scientific energies and electromagnetic energies tend to disrupt spiritual energies. But that's me being a pedant and once again putting more thought into this premise than the writers did. But hey, that's kind of my fucking job. So, the fuck? These creatures shouldn't have DNA. They're spiritual beings. They should only manifest physically insofar as they need to, and therefore not have any DNA per se. The fuck? Anyway, B-plot really further revolves around Nora, Agent Sharp, and the new girl Mona, the one that's basically the creature whisperer, having a girls' night when they get locked in a cell together by accident because Mona is overzealous and wants to impress Agent Sharp, and also kind of accident prone, so yay. Other than that, there's not really much else to talk about, and with that, we get into the Legends of the Minotaur. This is the final act of our little review today. I have a feeling, since there's not really going to be much left to talk about afterwards. Anyway, on with the Legends of the Minotaur. Now, the legend of the Minotaur begins not in Greece or Rome, as one might expect, but in Crete, a country that was just off the coast of the lower Mediterranean and is often frequently associated with a culture known as the Minoans, which are thought to be the partial inspiration or a derivative of the Atlanteans, interestingly enough. Anyway, it was said that every year the Cretians were to sacrifice the most beloved bull that they could manage, or a calf of said bull, to the god Zeus. One of these years, however, the king of Crete took pity on one of the young calves because it was so beautiful that he couldn't bear to part with it, and sacrificed a lesser calf in its place instead. Zeus, being a Greek god and kind of a dickhead, pagan gods are kind of dicks, guys, let's not forget about that, took the predictable amount of offense to this. I guess the Greek gods are a little bit social justice-y when all things are considered. Although in Zeus's defense, he was almost eaten alive by his father Kronos, so parenting among the Greek gods wasn't the greatest thing ever. And he decided to make the king of Crete fall in love with one of the female bulls. Or rather, heifers, sorry. My cattle terminology is not the best thing ever. But anyway, he made the king fall in love with said thing, and they screwed, and because this was, a divinely sanctioned union and not under normal natural circumstances, they actually conceived, and the Minotaur was the result. The king, so ashamed by his, bestiality, but then again, who wouldn't be, decided to wall off the Minotaur in a labyrinth, and the rest is history, and he would sacrifice people to it, causing Crete to become a far more prosperous nation, because when you, have the threat of, serve us or we will feed you to a bull that, is also part man, it tends to make you a little bit of a power in the Mediterranean region, apparently. In Legend's case, something they tweak about the Minotaur is, rather than being the, bull-like fiend and monster that he was in the original myths, he's a little bit of a coward, and he stays mostly in the labyrinth out of shame, more so than out of, animalistic desire and the lack of ability to think, because it was presumed that the Minotaur couldn't think, being as his mind was more like unto a bull than it was a man. I guess in this case not, and the Minotaur stays hidden mostly out of shame, so when he finds himself out of Malice's prison, see, Legend Season 3, he finds the nearest hiding place he can, and when he's in Paris in the 1920s, that's the Parisian catacombs. Enter our intrepid band of legends who try to do the usual thing and make sure that the Minotaur is unharmed. Hank's masculinity and Hemingway's bravado get in the way. Tee-hee legends and tee-hee toxic masculinity moving on. And nothing is particularly unpredictable here. Eventually, it's found out that you can soothe the Minotaur to sleep with a lullaby, which I'm pretty sure is something that they made up or borrowed from another Greek myth, probably the myths of Cerberus being lulled to sleep by Orpheus, more so than the Minotaur myth itself, because I don't recall any version of the Minotaur myth where that was stated. Although, I could be wrong, the Greeks did love to, repeat various themes, and various themes apparently tended to work. So, it's possible that some version of the Minotaur story had that in it, just none that I'm explicitly familiar with. And basically, Nate proves himself to the Elder Haywood, and the Elder Haywood learns not to be such a dickhead. Meanwhile, in the B-plot, Ava learns the very obvious, maybe we should treat these creatures with some measure of respect and affection, that way they won't treat us like, food. And by the end of their girls' night, she's softened up considerably. Nora and Ray have had their little meet cute, and all is right with the world, and Mona has proved herself. Yay, good, fine, good. And that was this week's Legends of Tomorrow, reviewed for your pleasure in just under the wire of how long I prefer these to be. There really wasn't much to be said this episode, it was mostly filler. The literary references and the acknowledgement of how awesome Hemingway was, and a few allusions to, I believe, Salvador Dali made an appearance, and Andy Warhol, I think? No. But yeah, the early 20s Paris thing was nice. I love this particular turn of this particular century, so it was always interesting. And having the Minotaur mostly in the Parisian catacombs was interesting, but all in all, fairly disposable. I think on that note, I'm going to say my usual goodbyes. So thank you, everyone, for putting up with me. I know this wasn't exactly my best work, but yes, and I know there was plenty of noise in the background as well, which is always annoying, but oh well. But thank you. As usual, I have been the Authenticator, and I hope to see you all at the next Mystic Juncture. Cheers, everyone. I will see you all next time.